Hi, I'm David Dubato, and this is the No Delusion Zone. My very special guest today is Judith Levine. Judith is a journalist, commentator, and author of 5 books. Most recently, The Feminist and the Sex Offender Confronting Sexual Harm, Ending State Violence. And she writes on Substack at Today in Fascism. And her work can also be seen at many different platforms and publications, including The Intercept and The Guardian. And some of her more recent pieces in The Guardian are going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. So, without further ado, Judith, welcome to the No Delusion Zone.
Well, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We're going to open with, again, a recent piece of yours in The Guardian, which I think can't be more apropos and timely, which is titled, We're Minimizing the Horror of Trump's Military Parade. So I'll just open with that. Why are we, and I assume you're talking about Americans and possibly the American media, why are we minimizing the horror of his military parade that just passed?
A lot of the commentary about this military parade uh, focused on the egotism of Trump. He likes everything to be about him. It focused on the expense of the parade. It was going to be up to $45 million. It focused on the damage that was going to be done to the Washington streets. And it didn't focus all that much about the point of the parade. The point of the parade was not just to show the military might of the U.S. Army or to celebrate the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army, but to celebrate Trump and to give us the impression that the military serves him. This is a classic authoritarian spectacle. You cannot look at any totalitarian regime in history and not see a military parade like the one that we saw on Saturday.
Why? And I know you've been asked this before because I've listened to a recent podcast with you and of course, read your material. Why are so many, not all, but so many average Americans not offended by this or not offended to the point where they're doing something about it? Why is this being accepted for the most part by Americans?
First, I just do want to intercept what you just said and say that there was a huge backlash to this thing on Saturday, much, much bigger attendance at the No Kings Day parades than there was at Trump's military parade. But why are people not paying more attention? I think they're not paying more attention. It's probably more than they don't care about it. Um, there's a pretty big minority, but a large minority of Americans who respond to polls saying that they would prefer to have a strong leader than to have democracy. Democracy is compromised. It takes a lot of time. It's difficult. It's messy. And so the idea of having, an authoritarian leader is kind of comforting to some people, frankly. Then there's people who watch Fox News, they read all the conspiracy, stuff on social media, and they believe that this is a response to, crimes against democracy by the left. So, those are two reasons. And I think, frankly, most people just don't pay attention to politics at all. Uh, and and I think that the Trump administration intentionally kind of blurred the Trump birthday party and the Army birthday party. In fact, this thing called America 250, I tried to figure out like who gave money to it and who ran it and who was on it. It's really opaque, and it seemed mostly to serve the glorification of Donald Trump and less to serve the glorification of the United States and the Army.
Well, you made a good point, and I don't want to gloss over this because I think it's extremely important. There were many, many, many more people who took part in the anti-Trump, the No Kings demonstrations all across America than there were at that, as you said off air, the parade that just drizzled out, both literally and figuratively. Millions of people showed up at the No Kings demonstrations all over America. And I think that's gratifying. I really do, and I don't want to minimize that at all. The reason I brought up the question, Judith, about why are many Americans accepting this is because I've written and spoken very passionately about MAGA and my dislike of those that support Trump, specifically military veterans or active duty military personnel and active duty law enforcement personnel. I have a background in both. And for them to take an oath to the Constitution and to support Donald Trump, to me, is the height of hypocrisy. And I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror. I really don't. And when I hear them speak, including some interviews at the parade on Saturday, it really just nauseates me because these are people, obviously, that critical thinking is an alien concept, or they just don't get it. And they're willing to forgive him for I'm sorry, being a traitor and trying to destroy the U.S. Constitution. What do you think or make of that, of military veterans, especially that support Trump, knowing who he is, what he is doing, and the oath that they took?
Well, first, I also want to point out that there were 60 people arrested for going through barricades and sitting on the steps of Congress with signs against the parade, and 50 of those were veterans.
Yes,
So there are movements of veterans who have actually opposed other wars as well.
absolutely.
Um, you know, when you join the military, as you know very well, you join it to obey orders. You have to obey orders from the top, no matter what they are. Any soldier who turns around and says, this is unconstitutional, what you're doing, this is immoral, what you're doing, they face going to the brig. I mean, they can, that's a serious, I guess it's a felony, right? So people who go AWOL, people who just don't come back to their tour of duty, those are very, very difficult decisions because you can ruin your life by doing that. So, and I don't know about you, you were in the military, but I do think that people who join the military are more inclined toward that kind of life, a life in which somebody else tells you what to do. Um, and so questioning that, I think it's like more than one step. For me, I grew up in a critical, leftist Jewish family, and so asking questions, that's like what our religion is, literally. So, um, so I do think that that's part of it. It's too scary to do it. It's too dangerous to do it, and it's also you obey the orders coming down from the top. Now, the next thing that the Trump administration has been doing, which is to remove officers who are the people who are going to be carrying out directly, the commander in chief's orders. Those were people who also, like every military person, takes an oath to defend the Constitution. Um, Everybody who in the first Trump administration were saying, no, you can't do that, who were in the military, are now gone. So we now have, like other authoritarian regimes, the Trump administration is building a loyal military so that he could have a military dictatorship.
Well, again, you brought up a good point. I just wrote a piece on I call it a rant. It wasn't really a speech that Trump gave on June 10th, last Tuesday, at Fort Bragg. And I called, I forget the exact name, but basically I said the generals, the leaders that you're talking about in the military were MIA. Where the hell were they? He was literally recruiting a Praetorian guard. He was trying to convince them that all the Democrats are bad. MAGA is good. And, of course, making the usual adolescent insults at Joe Biden and all lefties and Democrats and all that, and actively getting them to cheer him on and to possibly do whatever he wanted to have them do later. And that's against the rules, if you will. It's against the Uniform Code of Military Justice to do political rallies like that with active duty military. They know that, but more importantly, and you said this, Judith, their leaders know that. Okay, the rank and file soldiers, he can't do too much. Where the hell are their leaders? The commander of Fort Bragg? Where's the Secretary of the Army? forget Hegseth. Where are the generals? Why aren't they active duty, not retired? Why aren't they speaking out?
Even at that Fort Bragg event, there was Trump merchandise being sold, and
Yes,
nobody really knew exactly where it came from. And the generals said they didn't know where it came from, and who knows? Where did it come from? It probably came from this America 250 thing, but nobody knows. So allegedly investigating it. Um, Yeah, and at West Point, when he gave the commencement speech, he also promoted himself and bragged that he is the only person who's ever built up the U.S. military. Unfortunately, the U.S. military has been built up in every single administration, Democratic or Republican, as far as I can remember. So, um, so that's that that's happening at every single military event or every single time he talks to the military, which actually is kind of, you may remember right in the beginning of the last Trump administration, he went before the FBI and he stood there and insulted them. He stood before the wall of people who had fallen in the line of duty and told them that they were cowards. So he both um, insults the military all the time and people in the military. John McCain, I mean, he called him a loser. And at the same time, he's not glorifying the military, he's glorifying himself. And the military is his instrument.
exactly. And again, and I don't want to beat it to death, and I'm not saying you have to have an answer. I guess it's a rhetorical question, but I just don't know where the leaders are of the military during this time. I really don't. When he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley actually did take a stand
And
at that
MAGA
time.
hates him.
Oh,
He's one
well,
of they want to hang him.
Trump took away his security detail, and he has called for him to be executed, as you remember, just carrying out his orders. And so his life is in danger from this. So he was one of the few that did this. And so you could say, well, that's why the military leaders aren't taking stance. They're not going to talk against him. They don't want to be in the crosshairs. They don't want themselves or their family to be threatened. But you know what? That's their job. If they don't want to take that responsibility, they should never have done this. And they should take those stars off their shoulders. I'm sorry, I get passionate about this because that's what they're. This is our last line of defense. If our generals can't protect us against, creeping fascism, then we're lost. And talking about which, let me get into this. Because you write very, very well about all these topics. Another title of one of your most recent pieces is, and I think this was your podcast actually very recently on the Guardian. Has Trump turned the U.S. into a police state? What would you say?
David, you should say that again because you were breaking up from the beginning of
I think it's on your end, but that's okay.
that whole question.
Yeah, you're freezing over there.
And now actually you're sort of,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
I
not sure
think
it's
that
that.
the connection is not good. So let me read it again. Has Trump turned the U.S. into a police state?
Yeah. You know, uh, especially sending the National Guard or against the governor's wishes and the mayor's wishes to Los Angeles, when the mayor said that the LAPD, who are, like no pussies, maybe I should say no wimps, you can edit that out.
You can say
Um,
that. That's okay. This is the no
it said
delusion
that
zone.
that they had it under control. And furthermore, there really wasn't any violence, to speak of. And everybody on the ground there says that it was when the National Guard arrived that tensions rose and there began to be more, conflagrations on the ground. Um, so that, I mean, I said in this second piece that you may be talking about that in the beginning of this term, Trump was enacting what I called soft authoritarianism, and that was his attacks into intimidation of the press, of the arts, of law firms, of the universities, of the institutions of liberal democracy, and of the federal government itself. Um, attacking them, penalizing them, simply for free thought, really. But when he sent the National Guard to Los Angeles to put down peaceful protests, which didn't need even to be put down in any way, people simply, um, exercising their free amendment rights, their First Amendment rights, and furthermore, they were also they were protesting against the misuse of Homeland Security to go in and raid law-abiding yet undocumented immigrants at their workplaces, the people who are rebuilding Los Angeles after the fires, the people who do pretty much every work in every city, every kind of work. So he was, in my view, breaking the law from the get by using ICE in the way he's been using it. And so when he sent in soldiers with guns and also so-called less lethal weapons, which incidentally can kill you, um, and then said we have 700 Marines at the ready, and then he sent those Marines in. That was the moment in which the authoritarianism turned hard. It turned violent. And the use of violence by a leader against the citizens and residents of his own country is again a classic mark of authoritarianism, of fascism. So this is a very, very scary turn. I don't think it could be overestimated, the importance of that move, because he's not just doing it in Los Angeles, as Governor Gavin Newsom said. This is a rehearsal for, for other cities, for other states. If he can do it there, he's going to try to do it in Chicago, in New York, in other cities that, because we're cosmopolitan places, because we have lived next door to immigrants, because we tolerate people's differences. Uh, he's waging a war on all of that, not just on those who literally or explicitly oppose him.
So, do you believe that the introduction of National Guard forces under federal control and especially sending active duty Marines to Los Angeles was an inflection point, a kind of a turning point in fascism, I guess, morphing this country into fascism? Do you think that that's a historic turning point right there?
I think it is a historic turning point. I think you could say that January 6th was one that preceded that, but that was a kind of, it was an insurrection. It wasn't using the institutions, the military institutions of the United States, to do his will.
Because they wouldn't do it. Actually,
That's
he
right.
tried.
In
He
fact, they
tried.
got killed trying to stop it.
No, and well, I agree with you. In fact, the use of the Marines, active duty Marines, which actually took me a little by surprise. It didn't shock me he did it. I just didn't know that was in the plans. I knew he would try to federalize the National Guard, which he did. And as of now, and I may be mistaken, even though a lower court prohibited him or reversed the decision to allow him to federalize the National Guard in California, another judge overturned that. So as of now, Trump still controls the California National Guard over the objection of Governor Newsom. That's a huge problem. What are your thoughts about this? You've written about it, and I know you've talked about it. And you just mentioned soft power. I think his soft or fascism rather, his threats against law firms, big law, who actually, for the most part, bended knee. Although there's been a lot of pushback recently. What about the courts? And you write about fascism, taking over the judiciary and inserting apparatchik judges is also a classic move of all fascists and dictators. No.
It is. In the United States, the president gets to nominate the judges, the federal judges, and it's up to the Congress to approve or not. So Trump in the last time was able to pack the Supreme Court in his favor. The federal judiciary is still quite mixed, and so many judges, I would say that probably the vast majority of judges have ruled against his actions when he's been sued, but he just doesn't listen to them. He just flouts Not only does he flout their authority, um, you know, he calls them radical leftists and Marxists and gets his people riled up against them as if they were breaking the law. The Supreme Court, meanwhile, gave him last year in July the they gave him immunity from any criminal prosecution for any act that he undertakes as supposedly part of his official duties as president. Now, you could say sending in the National Guard is an official act as president. So, or sending in the Marines. Now, under the Posse Comitatus Act, it is illegal for the Marines to be enforcing the law within the United States. So that was clearly an unlawful act. But will this court decide that, well, he was, protecting the people of Los Angeles and therefore this was okay? So, in fact, he said, I have the Second Amendment, which says I can do it. I have the, what is it, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which just outlines what the executive's duties are. He says, and it says I can do anything I want. Well, no, it doesn't say he could do anything he wants, but that's how he interprets it. And frankly, that's how this Supreme Court, the majority in this Supreme Court, has interpreted it. So it's not like he's plucked out the judges. He did arrest a judge. That, again, was another one of these like massive moments of authoritarian power. He's not yet firing the judges as Hitler did and many other authoritarians have done, but he's just ignoring those who rule against him. And he is lucky to have the highest court in the land politically on his side. They're not supposed to be political, but they are.
Well, you write about fascism. And by the way, I love your Substack title today in fascism because today in America we're always in fascism, unfortunately. So it's very apropos. The Supreme Court giving Donald Trump essentially carte blanche. I'm sorry, to do anything that he wants. How common is that specific kind of a ruling? I know that all dictators insert their own people into the judiciary, but a Supreme Court of the land giving him immunity for basically all criminal and civil acts. Is that common, or is that something that we saw here? Is it not a one-off, but is it unusual, or is that standard?
We fought a revolution to not have that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when Sonia Sotomayor wrote the minority opinion in that case, she said, with fear for our democracy, I dissent. And, she said that we are essentially creating a king. And in fact, that's what the federal district court judge said before the case was appealed to the Supreme Court. She said very clearly, we do not have kings. There is no person above the law in the United States. That is the main principle of the rule of law. It excludes nobody. Now, we know that the rule of law is enforced differentially. If you're Black, you're more likely to go to prison than if you're white. But in principle, there is no person who is above the law, not even the president. And I would say, especially not the president, because of the power that he holds not only in the United States, but in the entire world. So not only is it unusual, it is an existential crushing of what the United States democracy is supposed to be. It represents, the reestablishment of an autocracy in this country, of a king.
Well, I will say this. I'm not shocked by almost anything that Trump does or the judiciary that he's appointed, or certainly not the Republican Congress. But I was a little shocked, I'll say, when he got that immunity ruling from the Supreme Court. And I was more shocked that not more people did not rise up. If there should have been an inflection point where, this was a 1917 moment in St. Petersburg where they stormed the Winter Palace, that should have been it. Because as you said, that's the bedrock of our legal system. If they're saying blatantly that no one is above the law except the president, then this is a farce. Like you said, it was kind of a farce. People of color and people who didn't have the money were always kind of shafted by our legal system. But at least in principle, it was for everyone. No one was above the law until now. And our country did not explode, Judith. Most people did, something like this, and MAGA actually celebrated it. To me, and I wrote a piece about this specifically, that's the day our democracy died, in my opinion.
I would point out that the 1917 storming of the Winter Palace was in the other direction. The Tsars were in the Winter Palace. They were the kings, and the people stormed the Winter Palace. So and at that moment, for a rule by the people, right? This is before, a communist authoritarian
Oh yeah.
government. Um, but it was the middle of the summer, it was the end of it was at the end of the term. Um, uh, it takes time for a resistance to build. And with each one of the demonstrations, we've seen more people come. It takes time to organize. So, um,
And I think we're in shock.
we're
You've
under
written about this. We're in shock. There's just so much every day to deal with.
yeah, right. We're in shock. And I mean, I'm very, very gratified I'm probably much further to the left than you are. Um, and I'm gratified to see that the left is really united, everybody against him. And not just the left, people in the middle. And you were saying you were not shocked by the Congress. When Nixon was impeached, there were many Republicans who voted to impeach him,
Yes.
or to convict, to not to convict, but to impeach him.
Yeah.
So, and he knew that. He could see that even people in his own party saw that he was a criminal.
That's what forced him to resign,
Yeah,
actually.
that's right. So, it's not a foregone conclusion that a Republican Congress is going to do everything, is going to just lie down and let the president do anything he wants. In fact, they've been in this budget bill and in other bills that they've put forth, they have been trying to give him more power, uh, power of the purse. They've pretty much given him the power of the purse. It's interesting to see that the only reason that they're now, resisting him is because he's not cutting enough money from the budget. Uh, so that's new too. I mean, and you saw that people said later after the impeachments, that people were afraid for the safety of their families, that they were threatened. People called them up and threatened and said, "You better not vote this way." So, and now you see the people who are sort of splitting from this Republican Party are not going to run again. So it becomes more and more entrenched, this 100% loyalty to the chief.
Well, I have to say, you're more optimistic than I am. I have absolutely zero faith that anyone who calls himself a Republican today is going to oppose Donald Trump. I'm sorry, especially
No, I don't
elected
think I
officials.
mean, they always talk about this like glorious Republican Party of the past.
Mm.
I don't remember it. It was just more genteelly screwing everybody. So, um, but at least most of them followed the law to a certain
Yes,
extent.
they lied
They
better than they
did,
do now.
most
Yeah.
people in office mainly want to stay in office. That's
Yes.
mainly what they're
Oh
doing.
yeah.
But,
Yeah.
uh, and yet, but this, complete capitulation, not just of Congress, of these big law firms. I mean, they have plenty of money. They don't need his clients. The universities, which laid down Columbia University before they laid down during the Biden administration. So, they didn't even put up a fight. And it turns out that capitulation doesn't work, because if we shouldn't have learned that from history. And so they say, yes, we'll do your bidding. And then he says, well, I want some more. I mean, that's the way, mobsters work.
Well, and that's the way
Supporting you for
Trump has
this much
always
money.
worked.
Now we want more money.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, believe me. See, most people understand that. Even the ones that like Trump understand that. They just support him, in my opinion, because he feels the way they do. which is another one of my not pet peeves. It enrages me that the entire I can't the atmosphere in this country, political atmosphere, has changed where rude is in, violence is in, civility is out. That has nothing to do with differing political opinions. And that is, well, it's manifested in the assassinations that we all just witnessed in Minnesota. It's not the first, but that's what's going on. And as you probably know, he had a list of I think 70 targets, liberal targets that he was going to go after next. That's being encouraged by Donald Trump. But I guess my problem is that that's de rigueur. That's the standard now among MAGA is to act out on their passions, whether it's verbally or physically, on people they disagree with. Where do you see that going? Because I don't see anything good happening there. In fact, I see that spiraling out of control rather fast.
And the fact that they're really armed. I mean, these people are not just being mean, they're shooting and they're killing people. I have to say, the meanness is one of the things that distresses me the most. Um, I've traveled in the South and people are very nice to you, even when they totally disagree with you. Um, and they'll say, how nice for you, things like that. Manners, manners have a purpose, which is to allow people to get along in the world and not to be punching each other in the face. And you could say that international law is kind of a version of that, right? Like we don't do these things to people. We don't commit genocide. We don't send people to black sites somewhere in other countries. Um, and that, and even justifying this as the Christian thing to do, to say that hatred is moral is mind-boggling. And I again have to commend not just the demonstrations that happened on Saturday, but pretty much every demonstration that I have been to in my life. And I've been going to demonstrations since I was in a stroller. So it is peaceful because nonviolence. I mean, there are certainly people on the left who want to do violence, but it's not like, Antifa, people with black masks are like voting for Democrats or something, right? They're sort of really outside of, of they are outside of the circle of even the most extreme left. Whereas people shooting, other people or, storming the Capitol are inside one of the two major parties in this country. That's a big difference. And if you look at domestic violence, it is 99.9% done by the right. It's not done by the left. And so, part of what we were protesting on Saturday was not just Donald Trump, not just this military parade, but the idea that might makes right, that militarism in itself, I mean, mine is a peace movement. It's this is not the way we solve our problems. We do not do it violently. And so it's not that hard to maintain nonviolence on these marches. I've been a marshal. You don't have to do anything. You just say, don't walk, don't march down 39th Street or on Fifth Avenue.
The civil rights movement was essentially won
Absolutely.
because of massive
Right.
non-violent
In the face of massive
demonstrations.
violence against it. You
Yes.
know,
It wasn't the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent
right.
Action Committee. I mean,
Coordinated.
I remember all these things,
Yes.
but that's like ancient history because the right either doesn't know about that, or if you tell them about that, well, they want to punch you. They want to get violent. This both sides ism, meaning that when we talk about things like this, the right will say, "Well, it's the left too," and look at all the left wing violence against the right wing. Really, show me some, show me any, and there isn't any. It's the right, it's the far right, and it's out of control because the commander in chief is instigating violence. He condones violence among the MAGA supporters that if they hear or see anyone that criticizes him, their leader, he tells them to punch him, to knock him out,
Well,
and
so
he'll pay their
pardon,
legal bills.
he pardoned them all, right?
So
And in
I don't
fact, there's now I don't know if it's the FBI, but whoever, is tracking domestic violence. they're saying that there's a rise in part because of all these people who were let out of prison. These guys were some like serious, violent, armed, insurrectionists. They were not just there like some people who turned up because it might be fun. Um, so those people, these, Proud Boys and all of, and leaders of those movements are now out again on the streets. They're organizing into small, neo-Nazi militias. Um, this is happening. I mean, I think I read this morning people talking about, um, fear that a civil war is starting. And when you look at fascist movements in the past, they begin with like, hooligans in the street, just, knocking Jews over, beating them up, spitting on people in the street.
The
It
SA
doesn't
back in the
start
day.
from the top, it starts popularly
Oh yeah.
when what fascism does is it deputizes some people to do violence to do it to everybody else. You're
And
us, you're the Aryans, you're the white people, you're the non-immigrants. You can do whatever you want. And I mean, I think it's very, when you read about the tactics of the Gestapo, they're just like the ICE tactics. Tom Homan has been wanting to do what ICE is doing now, which is to just go in and blanketly arrest everybody and terrorize people in their homes. He's been wanting to do that forever. And now Trump gave him the license to do that. And that's just what they're doing. There's a, there, these are not like disciplined soldiers of the US. These are goons,
these are
and they're
thugs.
allowed to go in and do
Yeah.
that kind of behavior.
These are the brown shirts. I'm
Why
sorry.
do they have masks on? Why are they wearing masks? I mean, when did this start that they're allowed to wear masks? And in fact, in a lot of places now, it's illegal for citizens to wear masks in public. So
So many people, Russians, who lived through the Soviet era, have been coming forth over the last several months and writing pieces and speaking about how this mirrors their nightmares of what it was like to live during the Soviet Union, that the Trump, the MAGA folks are taking the playbook right from the Soviet Union, from the KGB, and
yeah,
all the
and
tactics that
also
they
from Putin,
used.
the post-Soviet Union.
Oh, well, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Putin is the Soviet Union without an ideology. That's all it is.
yeah.
He's just a criminal. Anyway, actually, we have to wind it up, unfortunately, today. I want to ask you, with all of the recent pieces that you've been writing about, which has a common theme, of course, fascism. Where are we today, Judith? Where do you see this troubled country at the end of 2025?
Well, since this is an uncensored broadcast, we're fucked.
Ah,
That's where we are.
is that your professional clinical diagnosis?
I hope I maintain some hope that people are rising up, and you can never give up. You can never give up. You have to keep on resisting. That's what I learned from my parents. Um, but we are in very, very, very deep trouble.
Well, I'm asking you this very seriously. I mean, it
Yeah,
may sound, I don't know, funny, but
yeah.
do you believe, Judith, in your heart of hearts, and you have, I'm sure, I know, been involved in nonviolent protests for various causes for a long time. Do you see this country capable of putting together, of organizing a massive resistance, similar to what you've been a part of in the past, to confront MAGA? Do you think we still have it within us as a nation, or is that just history and it's just not going to happen?
Well, I think a massive resistance can be built. The question is, we're not going to beat the Marines, right? So, uh, I've always been a pacifist, but how can nonviolence bring down a violent regime? That's a really big question. Um, and I don't know the answer to it.
But
I think
it
that
has in the
I
past.
think if our side took, yes, that's true. In other countries, there have, nonviolent resistance has brought down uh, violent regimes. Um, It's taken a long time to do that. They weren't as powerful as the country that we have. But I don't really see any alternative to that because if the left were to take up arms, then we will have a civil war. And, you know, then a lot of people are going to die. And what will we end up with?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head is that we are a country awash in guns. I don't know the statistics, but it's something like between 5 and 10 guns for every American, man, women, children, doesn't matter. And yes, it would be very tempting for the left eventually, if there's no other way, to start shooting back. And yeah, then you've got a civil war. I don't know the answer either. I get asked that a lot, of course, and I don't know the answer. I just know that it's spiraling out of control. And after a certain point, there really is no answer short of an armed rebellion. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that in my country. So I wish I had a more optimistic way to leave this, but I don't. We're going to have to leave it there. Judith Levine, thank you so much. Again, your Substack is called Today in Fascism. I encourage everyone to go there and read it. And look for Judith. She writes in the Guardian quite frequently. She's on podcasts, and again, I encourage you folks to seek her out and read her work. Judith, thank you so much for joining me today on the No Delusion Zone.
Thank you. It's definitely been no delusions.